Progress.
Hello and good evening, everybody. We're just gonna be letting a few more people roll in. The weather here in Chicago today has been gloomy, but is not quite been the torrential downpour that I was anticipating. So I think that's gonna cut into our attendance somewhat. I feel like everyone's gonna be out in the nice weather until the very last second. And I can't say that I blame them. I really can't. But I know that that what we're talking about tonight is an often discussed and it's a question that I receive a lot when teaching. It's a big discussion point, I know, for a lot of people in the party, and also just from my yarn shop days. These were questions that we got a lot, all about sort of summer knits and plant-based fibers. So I'm hoping that not only did you bring your beautiful selves and some knitting to work on, but that you also brought your questions so that we can have a lovely interaction. Abigail has the right point of view, which is to say that she's been looking forward to this all week per the chat. So love to see it, Abigail, and Allison too. So two double A's, they can't be wrong. Allison, Abigail, my favorite A names. They can't be wrong. Okay. So, so we're gonna, I wanted to just waste a little bit, not waste time, but stretch just a little bit before we get into the core of our discussion, just so that a few more folks can hop in at the beginning, because we're gonna start off by talking a little bit about what I mean when I say plant-based fibers. And then we're going to use two patterns just as sort of an example of things to look for and think about when you're trying to substitute yarns. And then if you have a specific project that you've been thinking about for substituting, we can do that on the fly together and just talk about your options. Okay. So yeah, and if you are new to the Level Up series, welcome. I think a lot of you are veterans of the party, but if you're new to our events, welcome. On Zoom, we like to go ahead and keep ourselves muted during the talk portion where I'm just going on. I'll be sharing my screen in a few moments, going through a little presentation. And then if you have questions as I'm talking, please use the chat box. That way I can go back and make sure that I capture your question. If you have a super burning question during the chat, other people during the presentation, other people will be keeping an eye on the chat as well, and you are welcome to interact with each other in that way. And I know Allison is here to moderate. She's an expert moderator. Oh, here we go. This is perfect. Yeah, I was going to give people 2 more minutes. And then though we do often have Zoom hangs for our Bang Out of Felix knit nights, for our upcoming Vest Fest nights, for our previous Yoke Along nights, those nights we don't record because they're just chill vibes hangs. They're kind of happenings in the moments. But for series like this, we will record them. So these we're recording tonight and then we'll post them the next day. So if you see an upcoming Level Up series topic and you know that you won't be able to make it, not to worry, you'll be able to have access to that the following day. All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see me be very tech savvy and impressive from the jump so that you all feel comfortable and like you're in good hands. All right, so we are gonna hit present and standard. Okay, and now here we are with my beautiful PowerPoint presentation. Great. So thank you, Allison, for keeping an eye on the chat while I go into chit chat mode. And I will continue to admit people as we move along. So welcome to tonight's Level Up series. We are talking this evening about plant fibers and summer knits. So I wanted to start off by talking about what I mean by what I say. What I mean by what I say. That's what I want to start by talking about. I want to start off by kind of talking about what I'm going to talk about, which is the way Abraham Lincoln recommended you give a speech, and that's how I feel. So we're going to talk about the most common plant fibers and then substituting yarns and then some of my favorite warm weather knits because why not? And then hopefully when we go out to the Q&A section, you'll have some of your own ideas that you want to chat about as we go through. So, all right, great. So let's start off with what I mean when I say plant-based fibers. So there's generally speaking, and we're going to keep it high level and general tonight. We could go on and on and on about any one of these particular bases, but we're just going to keep it nice and high level. But in general, when we think about yarn that we work with, you can kind of divide them into two categories: plant or cellulose based, or animal protein based. So what we're most familiar with, sheep's wool on the animal side. This also includes alpaca, cashmere, and silk, because silk comes from worms. So it's under the animal and it's made of protein, most importantly. So it lives over here. And then cellulose is what we're talking about when we mean plant fibers. So everything in this column, and we're going to hit on all of these a little bit tonight. We have cotton, linen, hemp, bamboo, and I'm going to say jute. It might be ute, but I'm going to say jute because I'm an English speaker. So those are the general, like the top 5 cellulose fabrics, cellulose materials that you'll find in yarns. So the most common of those is cotton, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. But in general, when we think about the difference between that left column and that right column that we were just looking at, cellulose fibers in general, they tend to wick moisture and pull heat away from the body, which is why they're a really nice option for warmer climates. And protein fiber, or like wools, tend to wick moisture from the body, but their whole goal is to insulate and maintain your body temperature. So that's why protein fibers are warmer, because they're acting as an insulator, whereas the cellulose is drawing and is super absorbent, right? When you think about cotton, very absorbent. So it's absorbing and drawing that heat away. So those are kind of the big headline differences when you're thinking about that. So let's, I'm gonna just take a second, and just a quick reminder to go ahead and mute yourself. Okay, so so the first thing we're going to start out with is cotton. So if you've ever tried to use a non-wool fiber in your knitting, odds are it is cotton. And these are the Latin names of the 4 most common types of cotton varietals, because why not? But the main thing to know about cotton is we've been using it just like we've been using wool for a large chunk of human history. We've also been using cotton for a large chunk of human history. The earliest that we found cotton fibers in human history was 5,500 before Common Era, in between some copper beads. So it's been a very popular fiber for as long as we've had fibers in our lives, as made our own clothing. And the big thing that when we think about cotton as it relates to yarn, because you've probably heard of things like Pima cotton, Egyptian cotton, and we've all felt cotton yarns, everything that says like 100% cotton, but you can tell there's a different feel to it. And what is that really about? And what that is about is staple length. So how long the cotton bulb inside the plant, this guy here, how long each of these fibers are determines how soft, quote unquote, the cotton feels. So the shorter stable lengths have to be twisted tighter and more frequently to make one piece of yarn, whereas the longer stable lengths, like the Egyptian cotton and the Pima cotton, don't have to be twisted quite so tough. You can experience that as softer. So it's stable length is really what we're talking about when we're talking about which cottons feel the softest. This is especially, this is just reading about Leia's nickname in high school. So this is just, I don't know, you can just, again, go down many, many rabbit holes about any one of these fibers. But what I really liked about these pictures with fiber is this is where you can really see what I'm talking about when I mention stable length. So C, this is a shorter stable, and this is more commonly grown in India and China, and these are a bit shorter. And then A, you can see, are much longer than C and B, and A is the Egyptian cotton, so much longer fibers. This middle B is Pima cotton, so right in the middle. So again, these are probably classification terms you've heard and that you've heard when you've read like labels, everything from your ready-to-wear clothing and fabrics to your yarn. That's what we mean when you say Pima, Egyptian, or just 100% cotton. And then you can see, I just really thought this was a very pleasing visual about how these are the shorter fibers, and then here's the longer. And you wouldn't think that that would make such a difference, but because of how tightly you need to spin the yarn, it really can add up over time. And then this chart here I've included because this is from marketing materials for this, what they're calling Supima. And you can see that tiny little trademark there, right? And so this is when you see like a term on a label followed by a little bit of a trademark, that's usually, it's something that can be classified in the way that you characterize the fiber, but they're trying to kind of sell a unique selling point. So in this case, this Supima that they're trying to sell, they're trying to really bring home that it's grown in the United States, whereas the majority of Pima cotton is grown in Europe, and then it's strictly regulated for authenticity, whatever that means. But usually a brand name is usually just like a patented type of one of the four main strains of cotton. So then we're talking about linen. So linen comes from the flax plant, but the terms flax and linen tend to be used interchangeably when it comes to yarn. So if it says flax, it's linen, linen, flax, flax, linen. And when we talk about linen, again, we're talking about that stable length again. So there are different processes when it comes to creating linen. And generally there'll be linen yarn will be in one of three manufacture processes. There'll be wet spun, semi-wet spun, or dry spun. Leah, that was my nickname in college. But the mercerization, yes, we'll get to mercerization in a moment. But so the longer the fibers are, the more conducive they are to this wet spun process, and that gives them much more of a shine. So if you've ever worked with linen, like Euroflax linen, for example, that had a bit of a sheen to it, it was because of this wet spun process, and it was able to go through extra processing because it had longer fibers for the grip. And then these other processes, semi-wet spun or dry spun, are the stable lengths are shorter, so they have to be more tightly plied, and they don't get that sheen to them. Linen is also antifungal and antibacterial, which is nice, and again why it is a popular choice for like a beach cover up or things where you're going to wear and do a lot of sweating, because it's not going to grow. It's not going to grow gross things after you wear it. Then we have hemp. Hemp, which comes from the cannabis plant, which I think most of us know if we've ever gone through like a hot topic phase in our life. I was a big fan of like the hemp necklaces and what have you. Originally, it was used in paper and rope production in its early iterations in addition to the flowers that grows off of the cannabis that is used for medicine and recreational use. It has a similar production process to linen, but it is a coarser, because you can see from the history, paper, rope, it's a coarser fabric. So 100% hemp, if it comes in like a spun process, it will have a rope-like feel to it. So looking for a blend can be very helpful to your general comfort, but it's great for accessories and like bags, things like that, as opposed to garments, but it can be a little bit rough to the touch. Of course, there are both hemp and flax yarns that have a chain net construction and not the twist, and those can be a little bit softer. But in general, cannabis as a blend is my recommendation. And then we have jute. I don't know a lot about it, to be quite honest with you. I added this slide in right at the last minute here because I wanted to, at least it was on my list, so I was like, let's talk about it. But basically, if you think about like a mat, like a floor mat that is this color, that's like woven, that has almost like a straw-like or rope-like consistency, that is jute. It has a rope-like texture, not ideal for garments. It's usually used for bags, baskets, hard wearing surfaces like rugs, and it is also part of sugar and cream, Lily Sugar and Cream. That is some of their yarn is 100% cotton, and some of it is a blend with jute, which makes it have a little bit more of a rough texture. So, and then we have bamboo. Bamboo is also known as a vegan silk, but something to know about bamboo that I learned in this process is that it is actually heavier. Its fibers are heavier than wool and cotton. So you'll typically get less yardage in bamboo yarn than you will with wool or cotton. And this will come into play when we get into the substitution chit chat that we're about to do. But all of the things that cellulose yarn has in common is that it does not have memory or recovery in the same way that wool does. And so if you knit with something that is 100% cellulose, it is going to drape, 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 and continue to drape. So two things are really going to factor in when you're thinking about the fabric that you'll make using cellulose fibers, and that is if you don't have recovery, you're going to want your tiny, if you make a tiny swatch, you're not going to be able to factor in how much gravity is going to affect each and every one of those stitches. So if you're going to be substituting a pattern that calls for wool or calls for a protein fiber with all cellulose fibers, you're going to need to make a much bigger swatch and think about how much something weighs. So bamboo will be the heaviest per stitch, heavier even than cotton, which is heavier than wool. So something to think about when we're doing our yarn substitution chat. Okay. So this is the second portion of the evening, summer knits. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and head back to the general group because I can see that it's hot, hot, hot in the chat. And I want to make sure before I go into the next phase that I didn't miss anybody's question. So hello, Allison.
Laura, hi. Just following up, there was a little bit of dick chat and a little bit of talking about inappropriate things generally. But the big takeaway for me was mercenization, the process of mercenization. And I gave a little bit of a teaser, but if you came upon that in your research, that is the question that we have.
Yes, so that Allison has an explanation about mercerization in the chat that I find to be pristine. So in general, mercerization is a chemical process similar to the way that you make superwash wool, and it is a process that you treat yarn with to make it hold dye a little bit more faster so that it doesn't bleed as much, and also gives it a bit of a shine and creates a more consistent, even texture. So when you think of mercerized cotton in general, if you can identify it separately from non-mercerized cotton at all, what you probably think of first is the shine. It's very shiny. And if you think about superwash wool compared to 100% wool or a wool blend, probably the first thing you would think of is there's a bit of a sheen to it. So essentially, it is a chemical process that the yarn goes through so that it'll hold dye a little bit more and evenly and create a more even yarn for more predictable texture. And then the side effect is that bit of a sheen to it. And I don't know why it's called mercerization, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say the person that probably developed the process, his last name was Mercer. That's what I'm gonna say. And then I'll confirm later. But to me, that makes the most sense.
I also heard his nickname was Wet Spun.
The Mr. Well, see, that was my high school nickname, Ashley.
Mhm.
Ashley's like, what? So yeah, so mercerization, yes, great question. That is the deal. And then again, if we're talking about shine in linen yarn, then that is when the wet spun process comes in. All right. Any questions about anything I've covered so far? Any burning questions about like the production or just general, anything that I covered that was very confusing? Or was it so thorough that I answered every single one of your questions? Oh my God, so thorough. Okay, great. So now I'm going to move into the portion of what to think about when we're doing yarn substitutions. And for me personally, oh, Ashley looked it up. It's named for John Mercer. And John Mercer is the presumably gentleman that invented the process. So boom, I was right. We're done here. Good night. I win at presenting. Bye everybody. No, so I think the most important thing, and I'm very biased because these are projects that I have made or projects that I've helped people through. But I think that when we're talking about substituting protein yarn, wool, basically, and we're talking about taking wool out of a project and adding plant-based fibers in, there are a couple of factors to consider. So I think it's most important when it comes to garments, wearable garments, because this is where things can go awry if we don't take certain things into consideration. You know, when you're substituting for shawls, other accessories, I mean, if it's a hat, that can also be a challenge, but I think we'll get our most bang for our buck when we talk about garments. So we're going to talk about two garments and what to think about if we were to swap out the yarns that they call for, and then we'll come back here and review. All right. Great, thanks everyone. So we are sharing our screen again, and here we are back at Summer Knits. All right. So subbing yarns. So the first project I want to talk about is the Ginkgo Fight Tea by Emily Green. So this is a project that I've made that I adore. And when I chose this particular project, I chose to knit this in 100% wool, but the actual pattern, this was from an issue of Pom Pom, and the actual pattern calls for Quince & Co. Turn, which is a fingering weight yarn, but it is made up of 75% wool and 25% silk. So both of these are protein fibers. However, silk is very, very strong and inflexible, and it can mimic some of these plant-based fibers, but it is a bit warmer than some of our plant-based fibers. So with that in mind, this is a great place to start if you're thinking about substituting a yarn. If you're looking at a blend that the pattern was designed for a blend, you can kind of think about the ratio of the wool to the other fibers that it's blended with, and use that as a guide. So when I did a little bit of Googling, I thought, well, what if I wanted to do like a blend, not with silk, but with bamboo? And I found this Mashi yarn that's fingering weight, and it's a merino bamboo, wow guys, bamboo blend. There, I said it, say it 5 times fast, all right? But make sure you're muted. So down here, I can see that this has 50% bamboo, 40% superwash merino, and 10% alpaca. So these are two protein fibers that are going to be half of this, and then bamboo is going to be the other half. So I'm not a mathematician, as Allison's very fond of saying, but I can tell that these are different ratios than the yarn that the pattern was originally designed for. So if I have felt this yarn in a yarn shop and I'm simply in love with it and want to play around, then I'm going to know by how different this composition is from the base yarn of that pattern that I'm going to need to swatch quite a big piece of fabric so that I can really predict how this is going to behave, because the bamboo being 50% and which is in a greater ratio to the protein fiber is going to make this have a lot more drape and less recovery. Now, with a lace project, maybe that's not such a big deal. Maybe I don't care about that, but it's something to keep in mind when you start swatching for this, right? So another possibility that I looked for was this Regia, which is 4-ply bamboo. So this is 45% wool, 35% viscose, which is a plant-based fiber that has a brand name, and then polyamide, which is British for nylon. So this, the polyamide gives it recovery, and the wool gives it recovery, but it has some of this plant base for softness. So if I fell in love with this, I'd be a little bit more comfortable gauging a smaller swatch, but I would definitely want to test out giving it a real aggressive wash to see if there's any shrinkage to my overall swatch before I cast on. All right. And then finally, let's say I truly did not want any animal fibers. I have some kind of wool allergy. So I'm trying to do just a total cellulose sub out. So I looked up this Shibui cone, and that is a 70% linen and 30% mulberry silk, which is basically, it's a cellulose fiber from the mulberry bush, similar to bamboo. It's going to have a similar property to bamboo. So no animals involved in the making of this yarn, but knowing what we know about linen, this is going to have a ton of drape and no recovery. So I'm going to want to do a real big swatch. I'm probably going to try to do some of my lace pattern to see how it reacts to the linen. And that is, sorry, I'm going to keep talking and then I'll do the chat afterwards. You guys are so funny. You're just very entertaining to me. So I just want to keep reading the comments. But yes, so that this is a case where these ratios way different than the original yarn. So that's where I would gauge. I'd really want to do a nice big gauge swatch. Yeah. So here's another example of here's another example of a popular pattern that I have taught and will continue to teach, even though, you know, I have had my complaints about it, but it's a very beautiful sweater and I wear it all the time. And I substituted yarn for this. So let's talk about it. And I think there's a couple of things that shock people about the Friday Tee by Petite Knits. Number one, it calls for 100% merino. But if we look at the label here, we'll see that this is 100% merino branded Petite Knits. So that's why this yarn is used for this particular project. But that's a surprise to people. A lot of people assume this is some sort of blend when it is 100% merino. And then the other thing that surprises people is that it's knit on teeny tiny needles. This is fingering, but it's a light fingering, almost lace weight. So that is important to keep in mind, but you know, given the principles we just talked about in our previous discussion, you can still substitute. You just have to be willing to adjust your swatch. So this is knit in a stitch pattern in broken rib. So it's 1 by 1 ribbing and then 1 row of knitting, 1 by 1 ribbing and 1 row of knitting. So not only are you dealing with substituting you know, bringing in plant-based fibers and losing some recovery when you're not using 100% wool, but you're also dealing with a stitch pattern. And a lot of us have learned the terms in my class, flabby ribbing. If you're a flabby ribber, you may need to go down a needle size or 2, which is also a very common practice when using plant-based fibers because they don't have a lot of recovery. Often people will go down a needle size and they'll try to use a softer needle like a bamboo or a wood to help absorb that lack of springiness. So let's see what we can do shopping around for our Friday Tee yarn. So I found this really interesting cotton yak blend. So yak fiber behaves similarly to wool. And with this being a 50-50 blend, at least there'd be some recovery with that yak. It is a light fingering, so the odds are I could probably get gauge pretty easily. But my big question there would, I'd want to do a nice big swatch and wet block and see how much growth I get just from the gravity of the cotton. And I'd want to factor that in to how I want the garment to fit me. This is yarn that I used for my, this is in fact the actual color I used for my Friday tee. And this is as you can see here, it's a 90% cotton, 10% cashmere blend. And it's very, very tightly wound. So we can tell it's not the Egyptian cotton, it's the shorty. So I just was really in love with my colors, to be honest, and was willing to kind of do the extra work to figure out fit. So I didn't go down a needle size, but I did make a pretty large swatch, and then I put it through the washing machine and really paid attention to the growth. In particular, broken rib likes to grow out instead of down. It's just a weird thing about the fiber. So I was hoping that my cotton would offset that by sagging a little bit, and it worked out. But I only was able to find that out because I did some pretty thorough swatching. So in general, these are my key takeaways. All right. Cellulose fiber absorbs moisture and draws heat away from the body. When substituting, check those percentages, and the more those numbers are different from the original pattern yarn, the bigger your swatch should be, and the more we need to be concerned about gravity taking its course. And swatch, swatch, swatch. All right. So those are our key takeaways. And we have, and we're back. We're back for some Q&A. So I'm seeing something about Pocahontas, something about Zen combs. What is going on here? All right. So, okay. So we have a question
about the needles, Laura. And I kind of talked about what my perspective is, but I would love to hear what you thought about wood versus metal with plant-based fibers as well.
Yeah. And so the big thing, like for me, the primary difference, and I think that most of us here know the primary difference about working with a wool versus working with a plant fiber, is that it can be very hard on your hands to work with a plant fiber, because there is just no stretch whatsoever when it comes to those yarns. Even with blends, it can be a little bit tight. And for me personally, I think that bamboo or wood needles have more give to them. They're a little bit, this is not a technical term, but spongy. And yes, Leia's referencing working with Shibui twig, which is 100% linen, and is like working with straight up thread from a sewing machine, but with like tiny little like sandpaper in it. And for me, it's still going to be a journey, and your frequent breaks are definitely in order for something like that. But using a needle that is not a super hard steel or carbon, that has a little more give, can make the process a little more enjoyable. And the other thing, with cotton in particular, cotton can absorb up to 20% of its own weight in moisture. And that also means moisture from your hands as you're knitting. If you're knitting summer knits in the summer, you're probably, look, I'll just say me, I'm not going to assume anything about you, but for me, palms get a little sweaty, mom spaghetti, and it can absorb into my cotton as I work along. And my hands just dry out like crazy. So I have a very nice hand cream by your side, is also something that makes the process a little more enjoyable, because it's just wicking that moisture right out of your skin. Yeah, so Leia, your experience working with Shibui twig, which is it 100% linen, or is it a linen silk blend? I can't remember.
It is linen, silk, and wool. It is like 50% linen, or it's like 45 linen, 45 silk, 10 wool, roughly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha.
But it feels like I made two garments out of it.
Not enough wool.
I made two garments I love from it that soften significantly when you wash them. But I definitely got like a real gnarly like callus right here during the knitting of them.
Which brings me to my next point, Leah. Yes, I feel like I've leaned a little heavily on, it can be a bit of a journey to work through a large project using cellulose fibers. Bit of a journey, can be a little hard on the hands, can be a little bit callousing, can be a little much, but over time, people love working with, I feel like this is the defense of linen in particular. People really love working with linen because it does soften up over time. It's never going to become pillowy soft like cashmere, because its appeal is its strength and its hardiness over time, but it does soften up to a more wearable consistency, pardon me, as you wear it. But even woven linen fabric, if you've ever bought a new pair of linen pants or made a new pair of linen pants like I have for this summer, those seams are rough at the beginning, and then as you wear them over time they soften up. So yeah, and that's another thing you can test with your swatch, is how you would want to wash that linen. You could absolutely use wool wash, but you could also use your detergent and see if that makes a difference with the softness factor. Because what we always say, we're broken record, when you're creating your swatches, you're creating fabric, and that's how you're going to predict what that garment's going to feel like on your body. So you have to like it in order to reach for that garment. Otherwise you'll have two beautiful things that just sit on the shelf, right? The other thing I read over and over again is a lot about weight. So I think that most of you, if not all of you, are advanced enough knitters to know that what we're really concerned about when we're reading patterns is yardage. We're focused on yardage, as opposed to, this pattern says to use 5 balls of this yarn. So if the pattern says to use 5 balls of this wool yarn, 5 balls of fingering weight wool yarn, that's not going to equal 5 balls of cotton fingering weight yarn, because those weights are very, very different. And oftentimes when there is cellulose fiber, especially when it's not a blend, those skeins will be they'll have way fewer yards in them, but they'll be the same weight. So that's another thing that's really helpful to think about, is just always reference the yardage. And I feel like we've all trained ourselves pretty well to think yardage and not like, I buy this many balls, but it was mentioned enough in my research that I just wanted to state for the record, check out yardage. But the other side of that too is that you will have to buy more units, more individual skeins of plant-based fibers. So that could change your budget for your project as well. So it's something to think about, particularly if this is moving away from preference, like you prefer to use plant-based fibers and you're not a huge fan of wool, into someone actually has a wool allergy, or for ethical reasons doesn't want to use animal byproducts, then it's something to think about with regard to the cost of the project and fitting the right plant-based fiber into the project. So we have another question from Leah. Any advice for working with ultra poofy soft cotton yarns and to avoid pilling? So in particular, you're thinking about using this Blue Sky, which is an organic worsted cotton. Let me just take a look here. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is just one that like very early on in my knitting journey, I think I picked it up because it's like so soft in the skein, but it's like very loosely spun. And like many things that I attempted to make with it were flabby, maybe because it was early in my knitting career.
I do not know and would love to pose this question to the group. But for me, I was one of those early people that did not understand that there were different types of wools. And I thought I was not a wool person. So I did a lot of knitting with various cotton yarns over the years and knit them into garments. And I have always struggled with pilling when it comes to cotton, particularly in my high friction areas. Again, I identify as sweaty. So I would just have lots of literal like cotton balls in this area. And that's when I invested in a gleaner. Allison, are you raising your hand because you also identify as sweaty? Oh, wonderful. Great. We're friends for a reason.
Yes, but also I have more information.
Oh, wonderful. We never mind. Allison is not the sweaty one. I am the sweaty one, but Allison is the one with the info.
To be clear, very sweaty. All of my pits are felted. That's why I don't finish my pit holes. I gotta let it air out. So that's one of the reasons why mercenization happened, was to stop that pilling process, but it also really does lead to stiffer fabric that you don't necessarily want as a garment. So that's kind of the trade-off between like untreated cotton and mercerized cotton. Is the untreated cotton is fluffy, it's really beautiful, it's great for baby blankets. Like we sold so much Juniper Moon Farm Cumulus because everybody really wanted that softness. And, a baby blanket's just perfect for something like that, even like a baby wear. But as a sweaty human, it is hard to get that because of what Laura was saying about the recovery. It's going to be flabby. It's not going to have recovery, and it is going to pill because it is just so soft. Like what Laura was saying about those long fibers, the fiber length just does not lend itself to strength the way that other fiber lengths do. Hence the need for mercenization. So that's what you were seeing for sure, Leah.
One thing that I did really enjoy about the cumulus that we carried was that it was a chain. It was a chainette yarn as opposed to a spin, and it was partially that way because it had some nylon in there, which was why we recommended it so much for blankets, because it had that a little bit of recovery, so that it wasn't this like big like unwieldy project that was just, it would still hold like a rectangular shape, and kind of match the vision that people had. But the other yarn that didn't have any nylon in it, that was 100% cotton, I believe mercerized cotton, from Juniper Moon, was called Neve, which has sadly been discontinued. But that was the cotton yarn that I felt had the least amount of pilling. And I think that has a lot to do with how processed that cotton was, and then how it wasn't spun, but in fact, tiny little knitted chains.
Yeah, the chain net factor really came into play with that because it led to strength. It also led to recovery because those fibers would like be chained together. It was a really interesting thought process behind that yarn that they then immediately discontinued.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, a lot of times, the only way you're gonna know, this is a deeply unsatisfying sentence I'm about to say, but it is true. But a lot of times, the only way you're gonna really know if a particular plant fiber or blend is for you is to work with it. You get really into the nitty gritty about like what soft is, what is tough on your hands versus what isn't, and that is such an individual thing that picking up something and working with it is really the best way. But now at least you have some tools. If you feel something in person, you're like, this feels amazing, I would really like it for this, but it's definitely gonna have the more physical weight to it. Now you have some strategies to think about when you're substituting, and what you can do to really get a more accurate picture of what kind of fabric that's going to make overall.
All right. And then Abigail has a really great question about any types of projects you would not substitute for. This is a perfect place to bring up my tit bag problem.
Oh, do go on.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have a form, because plant-based fibers have no recovery and you have something that is form-fitting, your tits are going to push that out and not come back. And then your sweater or top will have pit bags in the same way that your elbows create elbow bags. If you're working your elbow a lot, you have that extra fabric hanging out there. So yeah, anything over the elbows for me is a no-no when you're working with not anything with recovery because you're going to have that bag. Royal agrees with me. And the tit bag issue with anything that has negative ease.
I also, to yes and that, a lace can be really tricky with cotton in particular. I mean, it can be cool, but that it really the lace holes, here we are, just tip bags and lace holes, you know, and what did you call me? But the holes can be much more pronounced and can create, you know, especially for something like the ginkgo fight tee, that might not, there's so much structure there that you might lose a little bit of that crispness and the architectural lines that Emily Green is so known for. So something like linen might have more consistency with the holes, but then the thick thin of the spin will create a completely different look as well. So it's, yeah, I think that lace is pretty high stakes. It's pretty high stakes for when you're substituting for something with a lot of intricate stitch definition or detail. But I also would say, because of the no recovery thing, to Allison's tit bag point, that's what we're calling it, you really wouldn't want to make anything with negative. Oh, we lost somebody with the tit. There's too much tit talk. Welcome to my tit talk. That's the real Friday night version of TED Talk. Tit talk. But you wouldn't want to make wear a garment with negative ease, with something that is tighter than your body measurements, because you would just have knit a hammock, I guess, and then you'd just be trapped in a net of your own making, and there would be no way to get that off of your body. So, you know, positive ease, oversize, lots of drape. These are like things that are going to warrant using plant-based fibers. Super fitted, probably not.
And then the next question is from Ashley. She asks, what differentiates good quality cotton from poor quality cotton? I will say branding.
I was just going to say that, Allison. So that's why I included that little chart, right? With the little like TM and all of that, you know,
Cotton's cotton.
Tencel, like all of these branded things. These are all big, you know, as we know, the fashion industry is big business, and when you break down what these things are made of, it's all kind of
all the same stuff from the same place. Exactly.
If you give it like one more piece of razzle dazzle and a cool ball band, you can trademark it in certain countries, and then you own the patent, right? So but at a cellular level, it's protein or it's cellulose, right? And they're going to behave a little more predictably on a cellular level. So the quality of yarn, I totally agree, is very much branding. But in general, it's sort of, I even hate to say it's universally agreed, because there's just, everybody can debate this for the end of time. But generally speaking, longer stable length tends to equate a softer feel or a shinier textile, and so that tends to be what's classically more desirable. But particularly with yarn, we already gave like examples of chainette versus spun, wet spun, semi-wet, dry spun. All these different processes kind of come together for you know, you just have to case by case basis, and ultimately it's going to be how it feels to you. I know I keep saying that, but
all right, next question is going to be you covered the length from Ashley too, so I saw a thumbs up, which means Ashley's good. Becky, I love this question. We get this question all the time. Is a summer knit tee or tank in wool just a total no?
For me personally, it's a total yes. I like it. I do.
Depends on how hot your tits are. You could be creating a hot straitjacket for yourself of boob sweat, which is what I do. And
in these cases, I tend to find when I tend to settle on for summer garments tends to be wool blends. That's usually where I end up. Some kind of blend with if I choose a plant fiber, it's blended with wool in some capacity, because I tend to really like that recovery and the property that wool has, with a little bit more of the wick away factor of my plant friends. That's in particular how I like to cut the heaviness of bamboo, is to do bamboo wool blends. But it's case by case basis. Like that ginkgophyte tea that I mentioned, I've knit that in Puri, which is 100% wool, but that lace lets a lot of the sweat out, and I tend to use that more as like a 3-season top, and not I'm not wearing it, you know, my birthday's the end of July, I'm not wearing it to my birthday party, this is too damn hot. But yeah, I think it's, you know, your personal temperature, but it's not a full no, but it definitely, I wouldn't want to do anything close fitting in wool for summer personally. What do you think, Allison?
Hot tits. Ooh,
Yeah,
hot tits.
so
I just
mohair
roast.
for summer for you, Allison?
Oh God, I don't like mohair at any point. But yeah, it kind of just depends on what summer knits means to you. You know, you don't pull that out like in August. But if you know you're by the campfire on a chilly night, you can get away with it, you know.
Right. And again, for me personally, I view summer knits as like I'm going to a restaurant and or going into like a giant grocery store where you're gonna just walk into a literal freezer from an air conditioning point of view. Then it's like a layering piece that I put on over my actual clothes. That's more how I use my summer knits, because otherwise I'm just like straight up, I'm sitting here in a fancy sports bra because I am schwitzing. So you know, I might throw on a cute little tee for the Instagram, but in my day-to-day I'm not wearing wool at 90 degrees personally.
Are there benefits? Is there a benefit to getting organic cotton for fabric structure? I'm going to say absolutely not. Organic is the way that the cotton is treated in growth. It could also have something to do with how it is treated in the processing plant before it's turned into wool. But anything that you're seeing with shedding or anything, that's to do with the process of turning it into yarn, not having anything to do with whether or not it's organic or not.
And I did want to take a minute. I didn't make this part of the official presentation because this is talk about a can of worms, but this could be a whole level up series in and of itself. But there are some questions as to like the sustainability of plant-based fibers versus the sustainability of wool. And when you look at the carbon footprint for like we'll use cotton because it's the most popular of the plant-based fibers versus wool, it's almost a dead heat for its impact. Different reasons like methane production, for example, when we look at New Zealand and how much those sheep fart, the sheep produce a lot of methane, which is not great. But then when you look at how much water it takes to produce the cotton plant, and then how much nitrogen is put in the soil to grow cotton, those are pretty much the same level of environmental impacts. But then it starts to tip a little bit because your cotton then needs more water, which is a very precious resource around the world. It takes more water to launder and care for, whereas you don't need quite as much launder and care for your wool. And when you factor all that in, it's about a dead heat from a sustainability point of view. So the only thing that you're getting when you talk about organic cotton in the growing process is that they're not using as much fertilizer and nitrogen in the soil. So that does shrink that impact a little bit. But when you're comparing the footprint from protein to cellulose, it's about a dead heat. But I did want to mention that because usually the organic is applied to the growing process of the plants.
Yeah, and if you're looking for the most sustainable fiber on the planet, that would be bamboo.
Yes, grows very quickly. It's a literal weed. It is grass.
It needs very, very little water.
Yes, but the production piece then gets us into manufacturing and shipping around the world and all of that. So, so that's where we are.
It's all bad, and we should just be naked until the winter comes to us.
Indeed. So that's why I didn't really make it part of the show up front, because it's just kind of a huge bummer. But we're doing what we can. Just to say that if you're swapping one for the other, your impact on the environment will be about the same.
Next question, can/should we machine wash and dry plant fibers?
I think you should treat your swatch the way that you would treat your, was that what you're going to say, Allison? High
Yes.
five.
Yeah, if you have a question about it, make a swatch, do whatever you will to the swatch.
So I
'Cause
say,
there's not a universal answer to that because everything's a little different.
because me personally, it makes me like, I talk about sweating. I'm actually starting to heat up and get upset thinking about putting my cotton yarn, anything in the dryer. Like it kills me. I get very upset thinking about it. But if that is the way that you launder your clothes, and I put every other cotton thing that I have in the dryer, but I just can't, the psychology of putting a knitted thing in the dryer hurts my heart. So I would not do that with my swatch because I won't do that with my garment. But you should treat your swatch how you treat your fabric, and then how you treat your final project, and then you'll know.
Next question, Renee is wondering about the difference between crochet and knitting as far as tit bags go. I think that it does. I don't know why it would be different for crochet. Laura, do you think anything?
Well, I think that when you think of crocheted garments, a lot of times they are, directionality, and they are kind of designed as like cover up scenarios.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have things like granny squares that are combined to make a top. And so even though those granny squares might be made out of cotton, the actual fabric are these little patches throughout, right? So it's not the structure of like a granny square is its own little contained piece of, for lack of a better word, architecture. I keep saying that word too much. Just got Emily Green on the brain. But it's its own little piece of tension throughout. So like that's going to have a different reaction than just I'm knitting a square and then I'm holding it up by my shoulders and that just sags down. So if you were doing single crochet and made a square and then seamed it together, that weight of that would sag down. But it's really just like there's many different, there's really two knitted stitches in different combinations. In crochet, there's legitimately different stitches, and that'll really affect how your garment fits.
Yeah, really good point. And then a bunch of people are just telling us how brilliant we are. So great job, everybody.
Boom. And just like that, we have 4 minutes remaining. So,
oh my gosh. Anybody else
wow.
have any questions? I know I learned way more than I thought I would. Thanks, Laura.
I'm glad I could teach you literally anything else then. It's about time. It's only 9 years of friendship.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But, I think it's important this was so interesting to me, which is why I volunteered to head this one up, because I also have had these questions like thrown my way and have always just been like, well, I don't know, I'm going to look that up. But if anyone is interested about my sources, please let me know, if you're looking at this in the future. Hello, future. Please comment below and I can send you some of my sources. I've got them tagged in my little presentation. But ultimately, definitely just remember that percentage thing. I think that was the big takeaway for me about if you're substituting, just the different the fiber content is for the yarn you're substituting, the bigger your swatch should be. That's my big takeaway. Bigger swatch, bigger risk, bigger swatch.
And then throw it in the washer and dryer and see what happens.
Yes,
right,
and throw it in the dryer.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah, do it. See what happens. But after you're done with it, not before you need it, because you don't know what the hell's going to happen in there. It's a wild, wild ride, like Renee's mom thinks.
Right.
Yeah.
So Allison, do you know what our next level up series is? I cannot remember.
I don't think there is one.
Oh, there isn't. Well, then we'll announce it very soon.
I know it's my turn. I think I was gonna hack some shit up.
Oh yeah, I want to do that along with you. I want to fix the collar of my sweater.
I think that we were gonna do some hacking. I had a note. I was just looking at this. I had a note that said neckline cutting.
Perfect. Well, I'm in if you're in.
Of course, I'm always in to cut some shit up.
I saw it IRL at the retreat and I am ready. I am ready to go.
Yeah.
Multiple Could be
Yeah,
fun.
it was multiple hand cams. It was it was so exciting that multiple people then saw what was happening and wanted to cut their necklines out too.
Right?
So it was like a real I am Spartacus situation.
Yeah, so hopefully Hackers, our June edition of Hackers will inspire the whole party and we'll just be slicing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Slicing and dicing. I love it. Yeah.
Well, in
So
the
let's do it.
meantime, next Friday, is that right? No, 2 Fridays from now is our first Friday. It'll be the first Friday of June at Roscoe Books. So if you are in
Yes.
Chicago, come on over.
Yeah.
Start your list now of books to order because we're going to put in special orders.
Yeah, and you can send the list in too, because then they can pre-order, so you can go pick up and you use your 10% party discount when you go pick up your class. Yeah, so everybody wins.
Amazing. Just another fabulous benefit of being a member of LauraAllyson.Party. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, I don't know about you, Allison, but I have to get out of this smoldering hot room and I'm going to have a beer.
I would like to tell you, Laura, that the air conditioning turned on outside.
Okay. I'm going to every window.
Open every window. Like there's cold air blowing on me right now. It's very wild.
Amazing.
So hot tip for those people who are in Chicago, it is now cold out.
Sweet. I have brand new neighbors who have been moving on the back porch all day, and I'm just going to go out there in my sports bra and my beer and be like, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. This is my space.
Right. I got to
fuck off. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank
Allison,
you, Laura. This was great. Thank you so much.
For being a fabulous co-host, Allison.
Oh my
and
gosh, happy to help.
And I will see you all on the party. Bye-bye.
Bye, Laura.